So one of the things that is really important for level six, especially, is preparing for the classes, spending a few minutes before the class, really checking those lesson objectives, vocabulary, and sentence structures. And I have found that with level six specifically, there are a lot of difficult grammar concepts that, sometimes we need a refresh. I always suggest like having an ESL or EFL grammar sheet, like a cheat sheet. So when they're preparing for the class, they can go ahead and look things up, write down some notes, and they know how to approach that lesson. Because they're very grammar heavy sometimes with the level six. Yes, definitely. So some funny stories here. There are some lessons on, Ramadan and Kwanzaa, and I personally did not know that much about either holiday. So my students were asking me questions, like follow-up questions about those things, but I really didn't know. So I think when you do approach a lesson, if there's content that you're not familiar with, make sure that you know. Just like the basics of it, you're doing a quick research about that topic, so you know how to answer the student if they do ask you a question. Yes, especially for level six, I find that the parents have very high expectations and they always expect some natural conversation here. So one of the things that I built into my classes is room for extension, or if I have to simplify, if it's too difficult. So some ways to do that are to use a lot of props or visuals or realia, like real props that you can show to the camera. So something that I really use a lot. So say that the lesson is about like animal adaptation, structural and behavioral. So I have like just some GIFs that I saved on my phone, so I can bring it to the camera now. And I can use those a lot during my lessons to just enhance it and just make it a little more dynamic for that student. So say that I want to bring up this GIF to the camera. I can use this as a natural conversation starter for that student and ask, what adaptation does the kangaroo have so that it can run away from predators, or how are its legs built so it can hop very quickly, right? So showing something like that to the camera really makes more natural conversation happen during the class. So like as an English major, when I was growing up, we always were taught not to use the passive voice, right? And some of the lessons, they make the students transform from like the passive to the active voice or vice versa. And for me, that was a little bit difficult to explain very clearly for the student and also to just think of examples on the fly. So that was one of the things I felt like I could have prepared more for. Really explaining the passive voice, like how you can use it when you're writing, and just really making it clear and simple for the students. Yeah, that's a good question. Like I think for the higher level students, the background is not as important as long as it's right. It can be minimalist but professional looking. For me, I'm always traveling, so I just put like that tapestry up behind me. But for I know lower level students, a lot of visuals, maybe your name, things like that. So I think for level six specifically, I don't think teachers need to worry too much about their background, but it should be professional, not too many objects, not too distracting. And I think for those lower level classes, I've seen teachers with really colorful backgrounds, lots of effects or their name, things like that, which is great. But I think for level six students, it's more about the content. As long as you have that very professional classroom, that's totally fine. Yeah, good question. Whenever I have those younger students that are 7, 8, or 9 for level six, I really make sure to incorporate a lot of visuals here. And then my reward system is more colorful or more appealing for them. As opposed to higher level students, the reward system is more secondary. So I think it's all about the content. And the higher level students really like, playing word games as a reward system. So that can be anything from Mad Libs to Hangman, even tic-tac-toe, making sentences with different vocabulary words. But I think for the lower level students, my approach is, okay, I should always have some visuals prepared just in case. Sometimes the reading is too difficult for that student. So then I can, show something from my phone or have a prop like this, for example, and that can spark some more natural conversation for that student as opposed to someone that's a little bit older. I have students that are 8 or 9, and then I have students that are like 13 plus for level six. And I really find that sometimes the students can be displaced. Like, for example, the student can really read well, all the words, but then you ask them a question about what they just read and they have no idea, right? So that's one of the biggest differences. That's why I say low and high level students in level 6, because you have those low level students that know how to read, right? They know how to read the words, but they don't know the content. And you have those higher level students that know how to read, plus they know the content, right? They really have comprehension here. So that's the biggest issue that I'm finding in level 6 is that students are placed because they can read fluently, but they're not comprehending the material. Yeah. So you have to spend more time making sure that they comprehend what they just read, doing those comprehension check questions, slowing them down as well, because they speak too quickly. So making sure that they know what the words mean. Yeah, anytime I have a student that's more advanced, say that they're getting through a slide in 20 seconds or less, right? They know all the material. It's really all about extending at that point. So finding some GIFs, finding some photos, finding any realia or props that can just add more to that lesson. So for example, if I'm talking about rams, you know, battering heads with their horns, I can find a GIF that's similar to that or showing it like this, and then we can have a conversation about it, and then I can go into more detail. This is really great for extending conversation very naturally. And then I have a lot of times the students will like show me something from a book or their workbook or even something on their phone. They'll bring it to the camera as well, and then we'll talk about it. The parents really like anytime you can extend in natural conversation, even beyond the lesson content as well. Any way that they can relate any of the content that they're learning about to their personal life is essential for level 6. So say it's a lesson about pollution or picking up trash in your neighborhood. I always ask them questions on, do you pick up trash in your neighborhood? Or how does your park look like where you live? How does pollution affect you in your daily life? Making those personal connections is essential. And I think also building rapport with the level 6 student is also such a great technique to really make that class more engaging here. So if it's a regular student of mine, I will go ahead and ask them about their day or their weekend or show me a picture from your phone. Like I'll show a picture of something I ate over the weekend. Maybe they can show me as well. It's a natural way to have that rapport with a regular student. If it's a student I've never seen before, I always recommend to have like a name tag made with some visual icons, right? Because you can use this to scaffold questions and build rapport at the very beginning of class. If you're just saying like, my name is teacher David, what's your name? There are no visuals there. There's no connection that you can make with the student. But then I can ask them, do you know where I'm from? Where are you from? I live in San Diego. Where do you live? And you can go ahead and scaffold questions from there. That's a great way to build rapport with that student and have them remember you as well. Good question. I definitely ask them what they like. So I have students that love superheroes, right? So for a reward system, I keep it simple. I have these like superhero dollars, right? And these are great. It's a nice way to make a connection with that student, build that rapport continuing through the lesson. And every time I try to ask them, what do you like? What have you seen? What interests you? Because they know how to answer those questions for level 6. And then I can incorporate that into a reward system. And that's a great way to have that connection with a long-time regular student. Definitely for level 6, you have to make sure that you're really managing your time well, and it's all about pacing here because parents really do not like when you skip slides or skip content. So extension should only be added if the student is really going really quickly through a certain slide. So say in 20 seconds, maybe they should spend about a minute or a minute and a half with that slide. So you really need to extend in those cases, but say that the student is having trouble, right? You need to think about ways, how can I simplify this slide? How can I really make these grammar points or concepts stick for the student? So I think teachers should always be aware of the timing first and foremost, and then think of ways if there is kind of a lull or if the slide content is too easy, how can I extend here? How can I make it more dynamic? But first and foremost, it should be about how can I approach this content? How can I make sure the student understands? And then from that point on, if they know the basics, the foundational skills, then you can start extending for that student. I I like to spend more time focusing on those slides that are free talk or conversation or really checking for comprehension. So sometimes I have these slides where there are 6 questions, right? And I know I can't get through every single question. I never want to skip the slide, but I try to reduce the amount of time I spend on that slide by randomizing it. So maybe I'll have like a big die. I'll go ahead and shake it. What's the answer for number 6? What's the answer for number 4? If I know they mastered the objective on that slide, right? Say it's unscrambling sentences and they did 2 of those, it's okay for me to move on. And then I can spend more time on a slide for reading, for example, or for free talk. And I think that's totally fine because the parents really like more extra conversation because kind of those drill skills, those 6 questions, they'll go ahead and encounter that in their online homework or in their workbooks, for example. Whereas the parents really want a lot of conversation, making sure that they're comprehending the material here in a level 6 lesson. So some ways that I like to do a role reversal with the students are I have them ask me a question. So I have like a little prop right here. I bring it to the camera. They ask me the question. I answer. They also love to do spelling tests with me. So say it's a vocab word like pollution. I'll go ahead and bring out my whiteboard or I'll use the chat box. Usually I'll spell it wrong incorrectly on purpose, right? So pollution. They have to correct me as the teacher. They like to catch my mistakes. That's a good way to also make sure that they know the spelling and the content of that lesson. If we're doing a conjugation of the verb like grace and it's a future tense and I say it incorrectly in a sentence, I want them to catch it and I want them to correct me as a teacher, and they also like to do that as well. That's a great way for the teacher to also check if they understood that content. So I have students that are just so talkative and so chatty, and I do this thing where I do like a timer activity, right? Because I know they know the material, but we still have to get through the lesson content, right? Making sure that they understand all the objectives here. So something I like to do is I'll put my timer on the screen, so like a stopwatch, you can do something like that. And I'll say, okay, Sally, let's spend 45 seconds on this slide, and then we can spend 15 seconds talking about something else, right? So then I go ahead and start it, and that's a great way to keep that student on target. Something else I like to do is, these like fidget spinners, right? I'll use this as a mock like timer. So like we have to continue with that slide content until I stop it. There you go. And then maybe we can spend like 10 or 15 seconds talking about something else, and then I'll do it again for the next slide. This really keeps them on task, and it's kind of like a reward system for them. If you're really doing well with that particular slide, I stop it, then we can spend more time talking about something else that interests them, and then we can continue with the lesson, and so on. For a shy student, I always make sure that I find some way to engage them beyond the lesson. So it could be showing like a funny GIF or something like that. So say I bring out like this one, let's see. So like we're talking about the structural adaptations of a elephant, for example, with the trunk. I can go ahead and show this to the camera, right? I know it doesn't directly talk about that, but it's kind of related to that lesson topic. So then she can talk about, okay, what is the elephant doing here? What is the elephant painting? What is the elephant using to paint this picture? There you go. That's a great way to engage a shy student and kind of deflect attention off of you onto something else, like on a digital tool. That is a great way to get a shy student to engage with you. Sometimes the students are just shy to see me as the teacher. So like I'll step out of the frame, I'll show something else on camera. There you go. Like if I want to show this snake or this sloth, my face is hidden, but I can still talk and engage with the student, and hopefully that they won't be as shy, right, to speak with me. There you go. I think teachers that move on from level 1 to level 6, you really have to adjust the way that you're approaching the student, right? So level 1 is a lot more animated, a lot more full body TPR, but level 6 students are a lot more serious here. Really, they know the material, they know the content, they're comfortable with it. And you kind of have to match their energy level as well. Because if I comment like this for a level 6 student, that will really overwhelm that student. And it's more geared towards those lower levels. So for level 6, it's more like a conversation, kind of like we're almost at the same level, right? That's a great way to really engage them in the material. Make sure that they're not overwhelmed as well. And I think that for level 6, if you're approaching a level 6 class, make sure that you're adjusting your content, your reward system, and your approach for that student. You really want to match their energy level here. And that means like you're not overwhelming them, like dancing around or something like that. You're really engaging them in a more natural way, because the parents really like when it kind of mimics, you know, how I would talk with my friend, for example. It's a really like back and forth style conversation. We're learning from each other. I'm really engaging with that student here. For level 6, you also want to do more 70-30 student and teacher talk ratio. So you really want the student to lead conversations as well, and really get to know their interests and then tie it back to that lesson. I think for level 6, that's essential. You always want them to express themselves and their ideas, because you want to take the lesson from here, right? And just make it, it's very static, and you want to make it very dynamic. So the way that you do that is you continually ask questions to them and also relate it to their personal lives. I think every level 6 lesson, you can easily adapt it and then ask them a question about how that affects them personally. If it's like a holiday I'm talking about in America, like Christmas or Hanukkah, for example, I can ask them about what holiday they celebrate in China. There you go. You made a connection with that student. If it's anything about science or gravity, maybe I can show something on camera. They can show me something as well. There you go. You made a connection with that student. Just get them to express an opinion about a topic, right? So I had this before. We were learning about Martin Luther King and African American civil rights in the US. And for a lot of the students, that was kind of foreign to them, right? Living in China. So I really asked them, okay, so let's imagine that you were living in America at that time. Let's do like that. You're in that person's shoes. And I think that's a great technique to use for students that are unfamiliar with a certain topic, right? So how would you feel if you were in this person's shoes? What would you do to fix this kind of issue, right? So equality for everyone, for example. And I think those kind of questions or leading questions are really good for level 6 students, just for them to get a different perspective on a topic at hand. I did that all the time when I was teaching in Korea. I really just had the students kind of do a role play, for example, where they role played that they were a character in this certain time period, in this certain story, and then what would they do in that situation, right? So that can be a way to kind of gauge what is their personal opinion about the topic, and just also connect with it in a more natural way as well. Level 6 parents have high expectations, and they really like when you do error correction with their students. So something that I always recommend is use that chat box. The chat box is a great visual record that you are constantly doing error correction throughout that class. And parents like that as well, because they can review that with their child later on. So if the student is having trouble with a definition or vocab word or grammar concept, go ahead and type that out in the chat box, or have them type out an example sentence. This is excellent. Parents always appreciate when I use the chat box a lot in class, because they can also review things with their child as well. And then I can also write in my feedback, oh yeah, make sure to review that chat box. We really talked about many different concepts in the class today. We went over example sentences. He did a really great job understanding the material, but just have him review this for our next class so we can build upon that, right? So having that visual record is essential for level 6. So ways that I build confidence in a classroom is right from the start. With that first title slide, and we're building rapport. Say it's a student I've never met before and they're making some grammatical errors. The last thing that you want to do, because they're, you know, speaking English and doing this other language, is that you're like chastising them or really overcorrecting that student here, because that will just create a lot of anxiety for the student. So the last thing I want to do is like, no, 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 that's wrong. You have to say it this way. If I start the class like that, they will not want to produce any language throughout that class. So make sure that you're really building a good rapport at the very beginning of class, having that natural conversation, you know, that warm, comfortable environment. And then when you're teaching that student throughout the class and they're making mistakes, at least they will not be shy about speaking up in class, right? So even if they make a mistake, they won't have that filter like, oh, I'm so anxious, I don't even want to say anything because I'm going to make a mistake right now. If you establish that rapport at the very beginning of class that you are not that kind of teacher that's going to yell at them or make them feel like they don't know what they're talking about, then at least they'll be more confident to participate in that class. Ways to go ahead and correct them in a nicer way is recasting. You know, you say that sentence correctly so at least they can hear it, or you can go ahead and type it out in the chat box. They can see that visual of that sentence that's typed out correctly. So that's a nice way to go ahead and correct them without being like so kind of mean or overbearing to that student. Something that I also recommend is that when they're reading, you really don't want to make them feel like they're rushed here or that they're, you know, stumbling over words. So if it's a word like characteristics, I really want them to try to figure out how to say that word on their own first without me just telling them directly, because I want them to have that skill where they are confident about approaching the word in the first place. If I'm just saying every single word on the screen that I think they'll mess up on, they'll kind of take that in internally and not want to speak up anymore, right? Okay, this word is, you have to say characteristics. At least have them make that a first approach. And of course you can help them afterwards, but have a lot of confidence in them as well, that they can do this. And then you are there to assist them, not to tell them every single thing that they're doing wrong, but to help them really have that confidence in that classroom. My final thoughts for level 6 as a teacher are, first, to really define yourself. Like, what is your teaching statement? How do you define your teaching style? Because you really want to be confident about how you are as a teacher first. If you are watching videos or, you know, taking workshops, take into account that every teacher has a different style and every student is also different. So just because you see someone act this way or teach this way, that does not mean you have to do exactly that verbatim. Find out what works and what doesn't, and then be confident in yourself. Another thing I want you to be aware of is that you should never feel super stressed out or anxious in the classroom. You always want to have fun because that will come across in the class and the student will have fun as well. So be confident in yourself and your teaching ability and your style. You know, use or see what works, what doesn't. Do some trial and error because that will make you a stronger teacher in the long run. And that will also make you more successful with VIP Kid as well.